the spring semester we had to take a class called operating systems.
Operating
Um,
system.
Honestly, the concepts of the class are not hard to understand, but the way the professor teaches it is she really wants you to have a complete understanding. So she throws like all these trick questions at you,
Right.
and then obviously, most of us are not innate geniuses. We're gonna fall for them, and then we're gonna suffer. So a lot of that class was just really it was like the academic equivalent of hazing. Like
Agreed.
they put a weed out class in the end of sophomore year, so we can't even get weeded out. We're too far into it.
No, we're too
So
far into like
this,
really pivot that hard. Yeah, there's like too
yeah.
hard to pivot
So
that.
I just remember, I guess maybe our class was soft, but basically, instead of taking it like a champ, like most other classes or sections did in past years, like what we wanted to do was we're like, this class is insanely difficult for no good reason. Like, how about we just make everyone's lives easier? And instantly, the first response from most people are like, I want a different degree than
Yeah.
these other people, right? Like, if I had to take OS, like they have to take OS too. Else we're not
Yeah.
real CS majors. I remember just sitting there, as like, honestly, dude, like I don't care about the prestige that UTCS has to offer if
Right.
like OS separates us from that. Like
Right.
it's just such
Exactly.
a egotistical thing to be like, like I had to mow my parents' lawn, and therefore I'm gonna make my kids do
My
it.
kids
And
will have to. It's like the whole with the whole like with like the like oh like my parents hit me, so like I'm gonna get to hit my kids type deal. Same the
yeah.
same mentality, right? It's like I went through it and I'm fine, so they need to go through it and they'll also be fine, right?
The
Like
funniest thing is like those like I don't want to stereotype them as like baby boomers, but like all those like older people are like I'm fine, like they're like on their like third marriage, they're like have an
yeah.
alcohol problem. I'm like, are you sure you're fine? Like
Dude, it's
I
like
don't know.
your standard for fine, dude, is breathing, and that is not applicable across the board. Like,
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Nuanced Nonsense. We're not experts, but we just like talking. This is your co-host Alex,
Your other co-host Ben.
and today I brought on my good friend Sahib. He's a fellow CS major. I met him through taking a lot of CS classes. We struggled a lot, and we finally made it out. We just graduated. He's also a Plan 2 major, which is UT's liberal arts like honor program, and as expected, he does a lot of writing. He does a lot of poetry. He's very in touch with his creative side. And yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add?
no, what's up, guys? It's good to be here, and yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with y'all.
Yeah, so usually, like right when we start off the podcast, we like to ask kind of a softball question, and usually this question we ask to like our fellow college graduates. It's like, what were some of the highs and lows of college? Anything you've learned or anything you regret?
Cool. Highs and lows, huh? So I would say that the highs and lows are kind of hard to differentiate sometimes, especially being like a computer science student. Like, I think we've learned a lot from our lows, and therefore looking back, they're really easy to consider highs. But definitely in the moment was like not that way. So I think in terms of classwork, hard to differentiate between highs and lows. But the highest of highs for sure. Like the biggest takeaway from my college experience is definitely the people I've met. So I don't think the degree is any of the class. Maybe it's just the friends we made along the way.
That's the real college. The
That's
friends
the
you made
real
along the
college,
way.
dude. They don't want to talk about the real college.
Yeah, I remember we had another guest that came on, and we were kind of like talking about it. I was like, no one really takes away from college like what they learned, right? Because
Right.
especially since like half the stuff you learn is like gonna be outdated in like 10 years. It's like the
Exactly.
real benefit is like the people you meet, the being like forced out of your comfort zone and challenging yourself. And I was like, wait, am I paying $10,000 a year to make friends and challenge myself?
The answer is yes. The answer is. But they won't tell you that at orientation. You just realize that
Yeah.
at graduation.
No, they won't. And you're just like, dang, is college worth it? And then you really sit down, and you're like, am I really paying $10,000 for the opportunity to meet people? Because like sometimes people just sit in their apartment all day and not go out of the room, So
Right.
that's the real waste.
But we talked about mutual suffering, right? And I feel like that's like exactly what it is, right? Like if you didn't make a monetary investment in your education, right, there would be like no reason to make the most of it. And so I think that like
That's true.
that like financial suffering is a fundamental part about going to college, you know. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't be cheaper, but I'm just saying that some investment I think is for the best. But I definitely
That's
think
true.
it could be cheaper. Yeah.
Actually, that kind of makes me think though, like the idea of like motivation, like how much of like what we do is like really intrinsic, right? Like we always need like money like pumped in for us to
Yeah.
like actually push ourselves. Like whether it be like, okay, I'm only willing to pursue this career because of like it pays the big bucks, you know,
Right.
versus like I actually want to pursue this because like I feel passionate about poetry, like you, or like I actually feel passionate about coding, you know, which
Mhm.
may not be the case for everybody.
Okay, I actually have a question for you. Like, what percentage of our class do you think is like intrinsically motivated to program? You know, like how many people are in the major because they actually care and like want to come to work every day and write code for like 9 hours?
That's an excellent question. It would not be more than 50. Let's just say that.
Right? Okay, yeah, I'll agree with that number. It cannot be more than 50.
It cannot be. It may. Okay, honestly, it might be around like 30 to 40%
Yeah.
guesstimate. Like honestly, the funny thing is like when you go into college, like I don't know about you, but when I went into UT, I was like very afraid that I would be like the black sheep, like because I wasn't passionate about coding.
Yeah,
Honestly,
I know what you mean. Yeah. But you're the only one sitting in class be like, nah, I'm here to get the check, you know? Like,
yeah, for sure. Like, you know, like I only pick CS because my dad told me to, because I had such a hard time picking. He's just like, just pick CS. I can help you if any problems. And then later on, he's like, I have no memory of this. I'm like, you're trying to gaslight me, Dad. And I'm
yeah,
not
you
following
got
you.
the shit out of you
Yeah.
for sure.
But then, yeah, it's just like, yeah, it's like you're sitting in class and then like everyone came in with their MacBooks. At the time, I still had like some shitty Lenovo laptop. And then they're like, they looked apart. And then you realize that, you know, most people like are really just in it for the same reason as you are, right? Or like,
Right.
there's all just fake it till you make it.
Right. And the reason why I asked this is I didn't want it to be like confirmation bias, you know, so like I end up just being friends with the people who also don't necessarily have like an intrinsic motivation for computer science. So therefore I feel like everybody in the major is like that. So like that's why like I ask, you know. So it's like do you think as well that so many of us actually don't like it? But I feel like I liked it a lot more coming in than than leaving it, you know? Like I feel like I liked programming a lot more the way maybe not the way it was taught, but like maybe the community of it in high school, like than in college, you know, like I feel like the computer science community is like pretty toxic, you know, like there's a lot of
oh, for sure.
First, I mean, but also like for the same reasons as like the medical community is toxic, the business community is toxic, you know, like it's all the same like competitiveness that is generated by like the institution rather than like individuals, you know, like I feel like it's like we do a good job of like not making it like that. You know, I feel like the institution encourages us to have that competitive, like spirit. You know, like
I agree.
I definitely think. I remember like Sahib was there too, but like at the very end of our sophomore year, you know, the spring semester we had to take a class called operating systems.
Operating systems.
Honestly, the concepts of the class are not hard to understand, but the way the professor teaches it is like she really wants you to like have a complete understanding, so she throws like all these trick questions at you,
right?
And then obviously, you know, most of us are not innate geniuses. We're gonna fall for them, and then we're gonna suffer. So a lot of that class was just really just it was like the academic equivalent of hazing, you know.
Agreed.
Like they put a weed out class in the end of sophomore year, so we can't even get weeded out. We're too far into it.
No, we're too far into like really pivot that hard. Yeah, there's like too hard.
So I just remember, I guess maybe our class was soft, but basically, you know, instead of taking it like a champ, like most other classes or sections did in past years, like what we wanted to do was we're like, this class is insanely difficult for no good reason, you know. Like, how about we just make everyone's lives easier? And instantly, the first response from most people are like, I want a different degree than these other people, right? Like, if I had to take OS, like they have to take OS too, else we're not real CS majors. I remember just sitting there, it's like, honestly, dude, like I don't care about the prestige that UTCS has to offer if like OS separates us from that, you know? Like it's just such a egotistical thing to be like, you know, like I had to mow my parents' lawn, and therefore I'm gonna make my kids do
My
it.
kids will have to. It's like the whole like with like the like oh like my parents hit me, so like I'm gonna get to hit my kids type deal. The same mentality, right? It's like I went through it and I'm fine, so they need to go through it and they'll also be fine, right?
The funniest thing is like those like I don't want to stereotype them as like baby boomers, but like all those like older people are like I'm fine, like they're like on their like third marriage, they're like have an alcohol problem. I'm like, are you sure you're fine? Like
dude,
I
it's
don't
like
know.
your standard for fine, dude, is breathing, and that is not applicable across the board. Like that's
They're
not
like
okay.
they're like, I'm in the projects, but God said to be happy with what you've been given. I'm like, I don't know about this one, Chief. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, no way, dude.
life
No
could be
way.
better.
Yeah.
This actually. Oh.
I was gonna ask you a question, Ben. But
Oh,
you can
I
go
was just
first.
like, I was gonna comment on how like this does sound a lot like hazing. Hazing is sort of like it's like where you want to keep on the tradition like from year to year, right? And so you do this. Like the same thing with kids. It's kind of like I went through this, and so it's like in order for you to feel like in order for our like thing to feel like exclusive, you also must go through this. Otherwise, you're like you're missing out on this.
Exactly. And like what I think is super interesting though is like the ability for any institution, like whether it be like a frat, right, or like a degree program or anything, to like not only say that suffering like is something you can go through, but encourage it as a positive. That's what's crazy. It's like how many people buy into the thing that like this is actually good for me. And like I think that like in a way that's necessary. Like you need to feel like it's good for you, like to get through. Like a lot of people need to feel like that to get through it, but it's like also has so much to do with like how much how high does our tolerance, how high can it go for suffering to where like we can continue to believe that this is like good for us, because like I feel like that can like lead to a lot of other problematic things like in other parts of your life, be like, oh, like this sucks right now, but like, oh, but it's like for the best because like it was for the best like at this arbitrary point in our lives, so I think like that's also like a very like concerning aspect of it, but like obviously like you like people have to get their degrees, so there's not really a choice. But
yeah, I really feel like it's just like taking the phrase like no pain no gain like way too much to heart, and then
way too hard, dude.
like you're just running with it at that point, it's a freaking sprint,
Yeah.
And I feel like the intent is just like in life you can't just have all the things you want and like none of the things you don't want, but then what a reason they're like, let's do this on purpose, let's inflict it on other people. And I just feel like the artificiality aspect of it is like what I kind of disagree with, because like I feel like stuff should be organic and natural, right? If you're kind of just like placing people in like situations to create suffering or kind of like create a story of like hardship that you overcame, it's like it's not real.
Right. Actually, Ben, I have a question for you. For like pre-med students, is there is there a specific class you would say that's like a weed out class, or like is there like an analogous like kind of thing to like operating systems in the pre-med degree, or like in the medical requirements?
Yes, a lot of people liken it to organic chemistry.
Okay.
That's necessary to apply to med school, and also at UT specifically, there's genetics. And the problem with genetics is it's like sort of the gateway class. You can't take any upper division biology class without getting through this class.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't say it's like a weed out because it still like has a fairly good like pass curve.
Okay, yeah.
It's still like hard enough for some people to not get through it. And it's like you get locked out from the rest of your degree basically if you can't get through this class.
Is genetics a big component of the MCAT?
I think biochemistry in general is really huge on the MCAT. So I guess I could say, yeah, it is.
Okay, got you. Okay, yeah. Because like I've heard, so like what I've heard, right, just like from like word of mouth, right, is like genetics sucks, microbiome sucks for some people, I've heard, and then like OChem, like across the board, right, like OChem is like a shitty class. But I was just curious because like for us, right, it's like the same way that like how you're talking about with genetics, right, where it's like you can't take any you cannot progress in the degree unless you pass this class. It's the same thing with OS. It's like the last programming requirement of the class. Like there's another like theory requirement which is like algorithms, but the last programming requirement class is like operating systems, and then you can take upper division. So like, but the same thing, right? So it's like most people do pass it, but like the difficulty of the class makes people like question whether this like field is for them or not, right? And I feel like that is in fact more problematic. I feel like like something could be like so difficult that you think that like it's not your calling anymore. So like that's I wonder if like I wonder if there are places, I guess, where that's like not as big of a component, you know, where it's like there is nothing in the degree that would help, like there's no such thing as like a weed out. But I don't know if that exists, but I'm curious about that.
That makes me think, like, do you think the concept of weeding out people should like be done as a practice at all?
I think that okay, yeah. So I think that weeding out should be a natural progression of a degree, rather than like weeding out. It's not something based on difficulty, but of interest, I think. I think people should be weeded out based on the fact that they no longer enjoy the material that they're learning, or like no longer like feel like they like the field that they're in is their calling, rather than like I can't see myself succeeding in this.
Oh, okay. That's an important distinction, right? Because I feel like nowadays, like so many like degrees and like careers are kind of tied to competency,
right?
And then like a lot of like kind of esteem is tied to like how much can I progress, and if I don't, progress, like they feel like a failure,
Right.
Yeah, I can definitely relay in that to like your sentiment, and that like part of me is like, in like countries with like the best education, like Finland or something, like teaching or education is seen as like a privilege and a joy. But I feel like here is just like a means to an end. So part of me is like kind of wondering if like, is that the reason why like everything seems so flawed, because like we don't even value like learning in of itself.
Right. So do you think that is a problem more with like the culture of the student here, or the culture of like the educator, right? Because like it's like it's easy to say like, oh, I wish that this teacher, instead of teaching me this concept, had like taught me how to love learning, like at some point, right? Like the most successful students at some point developed an interest not in their subject, but in like absorbing subjects, period, right? Like that's how like a lot of people are able to like branch out from one, like being just good at math, right, or just good at English, and like just being good at everything across the board, is because like at some point someone, or they in themselves, like instilled that intrinsic motivation just to learn, right? So I wonder if it's like, I mean, it can't be entirely either party's fault, right? Because like it's our fault too for not finding a way to love learning part of it. But I'm curious, like what do y'all think? Like, do you think it's like more of like an educator's responsibility, or like our responsibility to kind of like find what we like to learn and then apply that to other things?
So I actually read a book on this.
Okay.
Well, it's tangentially related, but it's like about this thing called the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. I didn't like the book because it was like very black and white about some things, but I think it instills like a good mindset, in the sense of like the fixed mindset is like very, very heavily instilled in our culture. And it's like, you're so heavily focused on success that like you become fixed to it. Like anything is like not success, you rule it as like super negative to your life, when failure isn't intrinsically negative.
Right.
The growth mindset is like you want to like learn from your failures. And obviously this is very like black and white, fall into like two categories. Right. But like the idea is that like it touches on education in some of the later chapters. And it was saying how this is like an educator and a student problem. Because they were talking about how like students are like brought up in this culture where it's like success is like the only thing they like, for example, only the valedictorian and salutatorian get speeches, like you get awarded for a certain like GPA cutoff, you get like automatic admission at like this % cutoff, like that. And so it rewards you, and it rewards your success, right? It really punishes your failure. So it really instills this like mindset where it's like, if I fail, I can be doomed,
Right. It's like, that's like bad. Like I can't do this. Yeah. That makes sense. Like actually what is this book called?
What was it called? I read it for a class.
Okay, no worries. If you remember it, let me know. That's like super interesting to like think about, because that's so true. Like I think that like, to have the fixed mindset. What did you call the other mindset? It was
growth mindset.
Growth mindset, right? Like the distinction between fixed and growth is so interesting, because like I feel like that's so true, right? Like you're never rewarded for effort, right? You're rewarded for results. And I feel like that is like, a great weakness of like the culture that we live in, right? Where it's like, You know, like, okay, I could have studied for this test for 80 hours, and for me that's an achievement, right? Because I like wouldn't study 80 hours for a test and got a 95, and whereas this person like studied for 2 hours and got 100, right? They're on paper going to like seem like their endeavor is higher value than mine, right? When I would argue that the effort was literally a greater endeavor than the actual result, right? That's super interesting. I would love to read that book. That sounds crazy.
Yeah, sorry, I was gonna respond to mine, but I was gonna say like I agree with like the mindset that like it's both parties' fault. But I feel like it's really kind of like a systemic thing. I know that word has been thrown around a lot recently, but it's like I think from the ground up, like I feel like in elementary school, like people like maybe people are a little more excited to learn, but it's like very kind of funsy. But then for whatever reason, once you get to middle school, like everything ramps up. You know, it becomes like you got to prepare for high school. You know, once you get to high school, you got to prepare for college. Once you get to college, you got to prepare for the real world. Once you get to the real world, you got to prepare for the promotion, right? And after that, you're like, you got to prepare for retirement, and then you die. You know, and then I feel like life just seems very empty. And I think this kind of goes back to like it's very results oriented, versus like the process. But I think it's interesting because I feel like people are trying to encourage more of a process mindset, but then like they kind of get laughed at, right? Like, oh, you're trying to hand out participation trophies. You know?
Right. Yeah. The whole like boomer mindset of like, you know, you should like we're too nice to the new generation, you know, whereas it's like, no, y'all were just like literally abused by the generation. You know, it's like this is just like humanity.
Yeah.
Something really interesting that I noticed in like myself and some of my friends was that like you can see in college is like, for example, if you're part of an organization or maybe like a frat or sorority or just something that has like classes, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I noticed this in a lot of people is that like a lot of people tend to look down on the class that comes directly after them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I just thought it was super interesting because it's like this is a direct reflection of like that baby boomer mindset.
Right, exactly.
In the microcosm of college.
Right. It's like the whole like freshman to sophomore mentality, you know, where it's like, oh, I've been seasoned now, and therefore like I'm an upperclassman and I need to be responsible. Like obviously the hazing, right, goes back to hazing mindset, but like I am now responsible for this conditioning, and therefore since these are unseasoned people, they're temporarily inferior. You know, there's like the inferiority complex that's happening there, and it's like. And yeah, like I agree. It's like present across the board. Organizations in school. I would even say like obviously like I'm not there yet, like working full time, but I would even say that like I'm sure the same thing is gonna happen as soon as we start working. You know, where it's like, you know, this previous class of employees now has worked, like understands the system and stuff. So there's gonna be like a certain degree of like, oh, like, you know, you don't understand how we do things here yet, and until you figure that out, I am your, like, you need me, you know, to help you figure that out.
Yeah, they call that company culture.
Yeah, and they call that company culture. So, and I think that exactly goes back to what you're saying, Alex, about like it being a systemic problem. You know, it's like where this is it is now exactly the definition of a system where it's like across the board these things are happening. You know, where it's like not just like isolated to like, oh, it's only a school thing, or oh, it's only like an organization thing.
For sure. This kind of actually I don't actually know how like American work culture is like, because I'm sure it varies between companies. But I remember like having to do like I took a society and Korean culture class because CS requires you to take foreign languages, and I just substitute that with foreign culture, 2 foreign culture classes, and then it's like I noticed is like in East Asia, because it's like happens in Japan too, that it's very like hierarchical and like patriarchal. So basically like if you're an old senior guy, then like seniority in terms of like employment, then like you basically are like the king of the hill. Then everything else is like everyone's at the whims, right?
Right.
And then it kind of reminds me of like what you were saying, and that like, oh, you don't know how we do things around here. Well, you're gonna have to listen to me. Like I can shove all my work onto you, and you better be grateful that like I haven't fired you. You know?
Yeah, like
everything. Everything.
I showed you the ropes or something. You know, it's like you're welcome.
Yeah, and it's I remember reading like, oh, maybe we should abolish the system, and I think some people are like, no, we abolish it. I can't do this to other people.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
And then I'm like, yeah. In the end, like, and then I feel like people want this because it's like a never-ending cycle of like revenge. You know, like I gotta push off my anger onto like other groups of people, but then what really ends up happening is like it just never ends.
Right.
It's a negative feedback loop.
And it's messed up because it's like because exactly because it's like so self-fulfilling, you know. It's that the system can't break until people are like willing to sacrifice their ego, right? And be like, okay, you know what, like that sucked for me, but I can objectively understand like how bad it was, and therefore like have enough empathy to then not subject other people to the same thing. And like the problem with that is like even if 2 or 3 people feel like that, it's not going to change, you know. It's like entire groups of people have to feel like that, have to feel like, okay, like, you know, like this is bad, and as a group we should do something about fixing it, you know. Like you and me can sit here, like the 3 of us can like talk about this, right, and be like, okay, yeah, this sucks, right? But until like a mass group of people like have not sold out to that system, right, and been like, okay, wow, this is for the best, that's like the only way that like it's gonna change, you know. And like it's hard to make systemic changes, as we can see with what's going around in the world, right? Like we can't even get people to stay in their homes. So
you're right.
You know, something that
I was gonna say the moment mass became a political issue, it was over for this country.
It was over, dude. It was over.
Actually, have you guys heard of the game The Last of Us?
Mm-mm.
So basically, it was like this super critically acclaimed game that came out a while ago about zombies, and it was like it told this like really nuanced story about like fatherhood and like how much it's kind of like a very elaborate trolley problem, because basically like it's like it tells a story of this like father whose daughter died and then this girl who was orphaned, and then this girl is like her there's something in her blood that if they like kill her and like use her blood to experiment on stuff, they can't find the cure to zombies. But then the guy grows really attached to this girl, and he's like, no, I can't give her up, you know, she's like such a part to me now. And so basically it told a very nuanced story like that, and then people were like, whoa, this is so amazing, it combines like good gameplay with like amazing story, yada yada yada. And so recently part 2 came out, and spoiler warning, everyone knows this already, the guy dies, and so the group is super pissed, and like the whole story is sort of like revolving around her going around getting revenge on the people who killed him. But then like at the final moment, she's kind of like, okay, like I've had enough of revenge, this is like not sort of like the way to do it. And a lot of people didn't like that, because like this is not a nuanced story, this is super tried and like trite and like cliche, right? A lot of people say it's cliche and it's like super commonplace, but then if you like look at our culture and our society, it's not commonplace.
No,
like,
it's the exact opposite.
Revenge.
I mean, I definitely think that like a lot of things that are like really trite and like cliche, like they're true for a reason, right? And I feel like they're cliche because no one listens to them.
Exactly, right? It's like how much of it is like unoriginal stories rather than like this like obsession with what like could be, because it's not, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, it's like, is there really such thing as an original story? Like everything is inspired by something else, you know?
Right. Yeah, and yeah, exactly true, right? And like I think that these stories about altruism, like they get shat on so much in the media, you know? It's like people want like more parasites, you know, where there's like this idea of like hopelessness, you know, where it's like that's considered to be like novel, you know, because like people are tired of hearing like these altruistic stories, right? And I feel like that idea is like literally like the goal of storytelling shouldn't be in my opinion, right? Like this is going back a little bit like the liberal artsy like aspect of things, but I don't think the goal of storytelling should ever be like I don't think it's necessarily for me what's exciting about it isn't the accuracy of it. You know, I'm not particularly excited about the fact that like this storyteller like nailed the reality of the situation, right? It's impressive, right? Like Black Mirror, it's impressive. You know, it's like a show that explains like the evils of technology, and it's like very accurate and like very like, you know, it's very gripping, right? But I feel like the best stories, the stories that last, and the stories that like we have like studied in school and stuff, we study because it's like they challenge us to be better versions of ourselves, you know, like even if it is cliche, like they challenge us to like critically like think about how what we are doing like could have a higher calling, you know, like how we could be pushing ourselves to be better. And I think that cliche is like that term is like very much just used to like sensationalize this other like accurate storytelling, sensationalization like aspect of media and like what's kind of like being watched and consumed nowadays. You know, it's like very different. Like, I don't think if Parasite, for example, had been released like 100 years ago or 200 years ago, it would have. I mean, obviously, it's a fantastic movie and like it's a really well made movie, but I don't think the message would have gone over as well. You know, and I think that the reason we're able to enjoy it as a society is because we have come so far. You know, we are a so much better situation than we were back then. That like we are like everything is so good that we can afford to see bad in the TV. You know what I'm saying? Whereas like back then, like 200 years ago, like 300 years ago, like there were like much bigger systemic problems that had to be addressed to where you couldn't enjoy something else bad that was like in like a story or media. You know, I feel like that's like a progression that we are it's a privilege to be able to enjoy a movie like Parasite, you know, and the message that it gives, rather than like try to look to storytelling for an escape.
I think that's a good point. I think a lot of times like I would see comments like, why did this story have to get political, you know? Like I want to like, you know, have a hard life, like I want to like go pretend I'm like reading about Superman or something. And the reality is like for a lot of people, like their life is literally a political existence, you know? Like, you know, stories have the ability to convey messages that like if someone was like preaching at you, like your instinct would probably be to turn off because like I don't want some guy with some righteous dude like telling me what to do. If you're like kind of like being entertained by something, they're like, hey, here's this life lesson, like that probably will stick a lot more than like I guess a straight up speech. Right.
And like I think that's why like I personally, you know, this is like a little going into like poetry culture a little bit, but like you know, like when I don't know if y'all seen 22 Jump Street, like the scene where he's like pretending to do like a slam poem, right? And like they're like at the open mic or whatever, and all like the joke was that like it's slam poetry tends to be like very dark, you know, like people are, it's essentially like it's been described as like, you know, things like people go as far to say it's like trauma porn, you know, where it's like the people who tell the darkest stories tend to do the best at slams and stuff like that, right? And I don't know if I agree with all that, but at least when it comes to art, you know, I feel like we like sensationalize pain a lot. And I think that, again, like that is something that we're allowed to do. You know, it's a privilege for us to be able to enjoy that because we have come so far in terms of like really big, like a lot bigger problems. And I think that people like tend to undervalue like the beauty of like a good message, you know, like it's I don't know, that's just like a personal opinion, but like I tend to hear a lot more, especially in poetry, a lot more like darker, unhappy things rather than like good things, you know. And like even like our generation, like, you know, like very much likes to like talk about like, you know, like the number of like depression memes, you know, or like, oh yeah, like, you know, just like counting the like trying to get hit by a bus to get my tuition paid, you know. It's like a lot more like a lot more like in tune with like the darker side of things. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think that it's like a privilege that we're now able to like joke about things like that, whereas like that may not have been something that would have gone over as a joke, you know, a lot longer ago.
Yeah. So do you think like the pendulum has kind of swung a little too far to the opposite end? Because maybe in the past, like I know in the 80s, like things were maybe they were called like cheesy and like everything was like too positive. Like, do you think now everything is like the emphasis is too negative?
I think that it's not necessarily a bad thing or like something that needs to be like changed, but like I think that for me personally, like as a person who I enjoy like stand-up comedy, I enjoy writing funny poems, I enjoy writing poems that don't necessarily tackle political issues, like may be political in nature, because like I think that everything is to a certain degree political, like it's hard to separate that from like art or anything, but I think that as a person who finds a lot more joy in reading and consuming joy, that like for me and like people who are like more like me in their taste are like having a little bit more of a difficult time like finding things in mainstream media that push messages like that. You know, it's like very few times do comedy movies win best movie at the Oscars. You know what I mean?
That's a good point.
Like it just doesn't happen.
Often they have pretty negative reviews.
Exactly. You know, like people don't think that laughing is as valuable as like or like happiness is as valuable as sadness in like a storytelling aspect. And I think that maybe I don't know what like really is the cause of that, but I think that like that is something that like has very much like been on my mind as I have like been writing and like trying to find myself in that space, you know, is like understanding that like, okay, like I am not writing and performing a lot of the same stuff as these other people. And like, sometimes it's to my advantage and sometimes it's to my disadvantage, but it's like just the reality of the situation.
It's funny enough, I think, okay, so someone like, so I have a very sort of like dark sense of humor. I laugh at a lot of things that
right.
you're not supposed to laugh at, which is, I think, common in our age, actually.
Right.
Talking about it, like the depression memes, like getting hit by a bus, like those sort of train of thought are things that I find funny.
Right.
And, like I was thinking back on an experience I had when I first met someone. They sort of like heard my humor for the first time, and they just like how I talk, and they were like, "You are like a person born of the internet," you know? And like I thought it was really hilarious.
Yeah.
But I sat down and thought about it more, and I was like, it's true though. Like people like me and like other people who like create that content and find it funny are like born of the internet. And it's like the age of the internet that's allowed this crop of people to sort of manifest.
Right. But I think that the important distinction to make there is finding dark humor funny versus finding satisfaction. Like, okay, like for example, right? Like 90% of my humor I would describe as dark humor, but the important part is that it's humor, right? It's like that there's still this idea of that, like, yes, things are bad or things that are like things we can find like reasons to laugh, like even this bad thing. And I honestly think that's the beauty of the internet, you know, where it's like we honestly have normalized like things like depression to a sense where it's like if like no one would have been able to laugh about that, I think like 100 years ago, you know, where it's like
for sure
people wouldn't have been able to like find that funny because people were like, oh, like that's one problem would be like they'd be like, oh yeah, that doesn't even exist, you know, like depression doesn't exist, like it's in your head, right? But I don't think that it would have been as funny back then. I think that us being able to like find humor in that is actually a very good thing. What I think I guess I'm more talking about is like relishing the sheer relishing in like purely negative things, you know, where it's like
I see.
instead of like finding humor in it, you know, just taking it for what it is and just like almost like allowing the reality and the pain of the situation to like that feeling to be equated to like merit, you know. It's like just because this thing made me feel profoundly sad, it's more important, it's like more valuable than feeling like profound, like seeing something as profoundly funny or profoundly
I see.
uplifting, you know. And like to the extent that like when I'm like submitting poems to certain magazines, the number of magazines that say do not submit happy poetry is actually ridiculous. It's like there's like almost like this like obsession that, or like with the idea that like things that are positive in nature cannot be like artistically good or artistically sound.
Okay, I actually have quite a few thoughts on this. So one, so this will sound bad, but do you think people like start to center their identity around like depression and negativity, and like it almost gives them like a purpose?
Okay, so like allowing it to be a thing of purpose as well.
Like it's part of their identity, basically now.
Like, okay, here, I have a. So I was like watching a YouTube analysis of Billie Eilish, and it was talking about how like it, like she sort of like is the personification of depression. It is sort of like her aesthetic and her identity, and it's now become her brand. And that's not inherently bad, right? Like similar to like how there's jokes about depression, like her making depression her brand is not the negative part. Negative part is sort of like a lot of her songs and just like a lot of her social media talks about like, I'm depressed and I don't want to be not depressed.
Right.
You know?
That I think that's
good to be depressed. Like that's the implication. And I think that is like very, very negative because then it portrays a message to young people that, hey, being depressed is cool. Like I should be depressed.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's like this fetishization of depression. Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. Because I do feel like I don't want to like talk down on people's like pain and say like it's not valid. Because that's why it's like very hard to say this. But it's like sometimes I feel like, you know, like oh, like I had to take these pills to like medicate myself and stuff like that. And part of me is like, I'm glad you're able to be open and talk about this. But at the same time, it's like you're kind of saying it as like, hey, like this, I have something. Like, what are you doing right now? You know, like, me and Ben have this mutual friend. And sometimes like when we're like, oh, I slept for 4 hours. You know, he would try to one up you. You know, I slept for 2 hours last night. You know, it's just like that one upping is almost just like there's this glorification of like how unlucky I am, you know, how much suffering I've undergone. And I think that in of itself kind of takes away from like sadness or suffering, because like I feel like for that you're meant to like process it like with people or without people. But in a way it's kind of like perverting it into like, oh, this is like a cool stat to have.
Yeah, and I think that like a lot of like mainstream media has really like encouraged that fetishization, where it's like the idea of like this suffering artist is like very easily sold, you know, where it's like, you know, like this person is like addicted to drugs, you know, is like a sex addict and all this stuff, but they're still able to write these poems, and because of all this other fucked up shit that's like they do, that's why this has more value, because they're still able to like create this,
and it's all good.
So it's all fine. Exactly. So it's like oh, it's a necessity almost. People like start to say it's like you need to suffer to like, you know, to like be able to produce art, which I disagree with. You know, I don't think
so. That's actually the second thing I was gonna bring up, because like, okay, so Chance the Rapper released an album, The Big Day, last summer. It was not a very good album, to be honest.
That was terrible. It was bad.
It was very disappointing to a lot of Chance fans, because he used to be a good musician, you know, like Acid Rap was pretty fire. Coloring Book, maybe not everyone's taste, but you know,
it was pretty good. I think it was definitely good. Yeah.
It was at least it was very positive, uplifting, right? And then a lot of people are making these, they're half joking, like it's because he's too happy now, you know, he's married. Because I think in Acid Rap days he was depressed, you know, he
was addicted to Xanax.
Yeah, he was literally on acid. That's why it's called Acid Rap.
Right.
For them, they're just like, if he gets a divorce, we're gonna be hit with some fire shit. And I was like, honestly, dude, like, if he needs to be happy, then, and like, if this is supposedly like what will make his music better, then like, I hope he releases trash music forever. If like he's gonna be happy for his life, right? But I feel like now there's a commercialization aspect where it's like, people are like, I want this guy to suffer, or I want this guy to go through some ish, or else he's not interesting enough, right? I think that is super messed up. The fact that like, in order for someone to be interesting or like go to the real world, you count how many flaws they have versus like what they've actually like learned, like how much wisdom they actually have.
Right. And I think that what the bad part about this is that, like, you know, people like to attribute the art to the suffering, whereas like, you know, a lot of the times the like it's like, you know, like for example, I would say like, you know, Tyler is another person where a lot of old Tyler fans like will not listen to new Tyler, you know, where it's like, I don't like this like kind of like the direction that he's gone with his music, right? Whereas like I'm trying to remember, like as a kid I remember listening to like Yonkers, where it's like this hard, you know, like straight trap beat.
It's a very hard, it's very hard beat.
He like literally, I think like eats a cockroach in the music video, right? Like,
he's saying I want to stab Bruno Mars in the esophagus, you know.
Exactly, dude. And like he uses like the F words like slur, right? And like he uses like a lot of like anti-LGBTQ vernacular, you know, like it's like part of his aesthetic. Whereas like now his music is very much embracing that aspect, right, of himself. And I would say like just as good, but in a different way, right? So it's like, how much of it is this artistic like art, like this desire for the artist to continue to develop, right? And like a lot of people will say like, oh yeah, like when before he was like out, you know, where he was like kind of like suffering with his identity, he made a lot better music, right? It's like, no, not necessarily. It's just that now he feels more at like liberty to be able to make these artistic leaps because he's established himself, you know. Same thing with Chance, you know, like as bad as his last album was, like it is nothing, there's nothing else like that in the like in the rap, like what's it called, like the
community,
the rap community, the rap like the rap canon, you know. There's nothing in the canon like the new Chance album, but like it's not, I don't think it's very good, and most people don't think it's very good, right? But like it is different. And I don't think that it's necessarily bad because he's not suffering anymore. It's just that it's bad because he just took the wrong liberty, or took a liberty that necessarily like wasn't the best commercial success. But I don't think that's necessarily why it's bad, you know?
For sure. And honestly, at the end of the day, is like he tried something, right? And like, as much as like, it's better to like not play it safe because like he's trying to push the envelope. Of course, it makes sense that like it's not going to be good all the time, right? If like everything you tried was good, then like, why are you even trying, dude? Like, you're basically God.
Right, exactly, dude. And I feel like another person that like really embodies, like, no, dude, nobody asks like what like Drake is going through, you know? Like Drake's like one of the most foremost commercial successes in hip hop, right? Like I think he like has the longest standing, like he has like a song on the top 100 for like some X amount of years straight, right? Like he never became irrelevant. Like he's still, even though like he's at a low, like he has never become irrelevant, right? And like I feel like he's released bad albums in between good albums, but no one has ever equated it to like, you know, their suffering. And so I think it also has to do with like how much of a person's personal life is put out into the media, you know? And I feel like because we have such better access to people's personal lives now, we do more of this attributing to like, oh, they're doing this because we know that they did this at that same time, you know? Like, oh, we know that he was addicted to Xanax because of like paparazzi found him like super barred out at some bar or something, you know? So therefore we know he was going through something. That must be why acid rap was better. You know, we just have more access to people's personal lives, rather than I feel like more like people are not like trying to just critically analyze the art for itself. They're really very much trying to be like, oh, this is why the art was good, this is why the art was bad, you know?
I think that's actually a really important point. Like, to branch off to, for example, like sports a little, like star players nowadays don't get contracts unless the contract specifies somewhere that they have to control their personal lives.
Right.
Like this sort of like your personal life has become so easily broadcast across like all media. Like, for example, like YouTubers are basically selling their lives for money.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's crazy that like your personal life can be so out there in the public.
Right. I think I remember Kev Jumba saying something about how much it affected him, like kind of annoyed him, like that he couldn't like go to like the mall, you know, without people like constantly hitting him up for pictures and stuff. Like his dad too, you know, who wasn't even involved really in the channel, but like Papa Jumba like couldn't go out into public without like getting recognized, you know? And I feel like that's like that it is definitely contributing to this idea that like an artist's personal life must be why or why not they're doing something, you know? Even like with the like Picasso and like I forget who like ate paint, you know, but like things like that where it's like, oh, they have to be going through this like for this artistic mindset to set in, you know? He wouldn't have been able to create like art if he hadn't been eating paint, you know, which is like crazy. Like
I think like people like Van Gogh and Edgar Allan Poe, you know, I think like people definitely are like, oh, like, you know, like unrequited love, you know, loneliness, stuff like that. Like these are like the recipe, you know? I feel like I think sometimes like people are trying to put people down into the equation to be like, hey, if I put like these factors in, it's almost like a science experiment. Like I can create this artist, right? When I feel like art is something that's like should be really organic and innate. Like it shouldn't be conformed to like any like scientific rules per se. But I feel like it's much harder to understand because of that, right? And I feel like people like things that are very easy to understand. Like something I've been thinking about lately is just like whenever you watch a movie that's really good, it shouldn't be straightforward, and you have to like think about like what does it mean, right? But now what we do is we just go on Reddit, and then some dude on Reddit will explain all the themes.
That's
part of the experience, right? But I realized back then you're not supposed to do that, right? Like Reddit didn't always exist. You're supposed to rewatch the film, you know? And then that really makes me think about even the idea of like people are like, oh, I don't like spoilers, right? But if you think about it, if you don't like a movie just because you know what's going to happen, that means that film has no rewatchability.
Exactly. Right. Like the art hasn't achieved what it set out to achieve. You know, it hasn't. Like if the ending is the only thing you're looking forward to, then like there's no point for it to have existed. You know, you could have just watched the last scene and been like, I know what happened. Like I'm good now. You know, and like I think a great example of like a show that the ending is almost not important at all is Avatar: The Last Airbender, dude. I feel like the last the way it ends has absolutely like no bearing really on how like because like you know how it's gonna end from the second you start it, right? Like you know he's gonna defeat the Fire Lord. Like it's like there's no doubt about it. It's a kid's show. You know he's gonna beat the Fire Lord, right? It's not important at all. But like all the value of that show is between the first episode and the last episode, right? Like as soon as they set up the story to when he finishes and like fulfills the mission, right? Like that is like the true value of the show, you know? And like
also,
yeah, go ahead.
I like read an interesting thing about Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it was talking about how like there's a lot of subliminal messaging in like the topics that it tackles. Like for example, Toph is blind.
Yeah.
You don't see very many main characters in any form of like media
that's blind,
disabled,
right?
And they overcome it,
right. And the cool part about how it's set up in Avatar is that Toph wouldn't be such a good earthbender if she could see, because like then she wouldn't have learned how to earthbend from the moles. I think the moles. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just saying it's like turning like that's like kind of like the prime example of what I mean, right? So it's like you're turning something that like people ordinarily consider bad, like depression, right? And it's like no, this is like not only something that she overcame, but she would not be who she is without this like very fundamental part of her character.
Yeah, I remember. Okay, I want to say something else, but I'll. You had such a good response that I want to respond to that too. Okay. I remember. So like this year I served on like my leadership board for my ministry or whatever, and then it's hard time. So a lot of times I would have to like kind of talk with like my staff, just like help me process what's going on, because I didn't really know what I was doing basically. So basically we were kind of just talking about like the aspects of our lives that like we kind of felt were like we were like it wasn't fair to us basically. And then he shared and then like I was basically saying like, so you know, I have a lot of food allergies and I have eczema, and like it's honestly a really big like inconvenience in my life, because like I feel like if you want to talk about like fetishization of suffering, like I feel like neither of those things are super mainstream, you know, like no one really cares if you have eczema, honestly. If anything, it just makes you more ugly, which is RIP. And then food allergies just makes you seem like you're really high maintenance, especially since like a lot of Karens out there take advantage of that and just like I don't want butter on this, you know. I'm gonna say it's an allergy, and then no one takes it seriously. So I was kind of just like, this is like really annoying, because it feels like I'm being invalidated. Like I kind of just wish I was normal, right? Like the fact that like I'm aware of all this makes it worse, because I know what could have been. And then my staff was basically telling me like, but these things still make up who you are and like your experience, right? So like for him, he was kind of talking about like his own experience, and then so like he's queer, but then basically it's like, if he like wasn't queer, like he wouldn't be the man who he is today, you know. Like he wouldn't have to experience I guess, you know, having to come out, or you know, because like Asian American communities, you know, not the most progressive.
Way harder to do that. Way
harder to do that. But like because of that, he's able to understand himself better versus like if he wasn't necessarily. And I know there's a very thin line you can cross, because like sometimes it may come up as like, you know, oh, just take what you have and just like be happy about. But like I really saw this point where it's just like sometimes like the things that you think are deficiencies are really, you can make it into your greatest strength, right? Because I feel like if I didn't have like, you know, food allergies or eczema, like I wouldn't have been more appreciative of like the other aspects of my life. Like I do have like, you know, a stable household, being raised in upper middle class background. But even like just like I probably wouldn't have like introspected as much, because like I wouldn't have needed to, right? Like everything in my life would have just, you know, been great, you know. And that's it.
So this goes back, okay, so then I have a follow-up question to ask you, right? So this goes back to like that necessity of suffering, right? Like do you think that, like, not that it's like better to suffer, but like do you think all suffering is productive?
I think it's like what your response to suffering is, right? Like something I was thinking about was like, if you have if someone has a valuable insight, like say these cliches, if you are ignoring them or don't listen to them, then like what they said is basically useless, at least to you, right? So I think your like how you respond is basically like the most important part, because like if you like, you know, it's like experience it and you're just like, I don't want to do this anymore, like I quit, then like, you know, that suffering is obviously like terrible, because like
in vain,
you didn't grow at all. But if you want went above and beyond it, and stuff like that, and like you were like, okay, what can I learn from this? Then like, I don't know, I don't want to say like it was for the character development, but like, you know, you grew as a person because of that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's.
I also think that like that's kind of the reason why they ask it so much in interviews. It's a standard interview question, is because growth is such a vital thing in like a person's development, right? Like eventually everyone gets there. That's why they always talk about how old people are very wise.
Right.
A matter of your pace, right? Like everyone
right.
speed. And so I think that's kind of like why that's such a standard interview question, is because like it's a lot about like how you like did something in response to something.
In response to something, yeah. Yeah, I actually never thought about that. I feel like that's actually one way that like we do a really good job of valuing effort, you know? Like when asked that question, you know, like name a time that you had a challenge and like how you bounce back from it. I think that like is a very productive question to ask, you know, any human being. Although that like how so many applicants would be like, oh yeah, just make up a story on the spot, right? Like, you know, it's like there's no point thinking about it. But I think that like, you know, when that question is asked and answered honestly, that's like a really productive way of valuing someone's effort, you know. And I think that's how we should gear more of like, I think anything standardized should be more based on questions like that, where it's like, you know, what it doesn't, regardless of the result, regardless of whether you finish the project or, you know, your team is still together, anything like that, you know, like what did you do to move forward from that, you know, like how did you progress, something like that. I think that like, you know, just to not only talk about like negatives, you know, but like the positive of like the system is one of the, I think that's a very, very big positive of the system, you know, where it's like that is you're right, a very standard interview question, and like one that I think is, although I like hated it like doing recruiting, like I think right now is like actually a very productive question to ask you, like now that you like talk about it like that.
Yeah, I think like a big thing about like in like interviews in of itself, like this is a tangent, but it's just like I think the whole point is meant to be like a conversation to get to like know each other better. So just like be like, are you a good fit? Like how do you evaluate problems? But I feel like because people are like, I can't fail, like I need to have this job, it's become a game, you know.
It's like more like a test.
Yeah. Like how can I manufacture a situation or exaggerate a situation where I went above and beyond? You know, I may have cured cancer if I was given the right material.
Right.
Which I think is like really sad because like, you know, it's taken the authenticity out of a lot of stuff. Like take networking, for example. Networking is really just meant to be like, hey, this is who I know. And we're friends. So like, we're not going to be super formal in the process. We'll help each other out. But then it became like, who can I use in the process? You know, who can I use to fame? Who can I use to success and glory? And I think that's just like really sad because now you start to view all your friends as people you can just use versus like, hey, these are just, you know, people I like and respect and like I would do anything for.
Right. And it's crazy how much that percolates to like college setting too, where it's like you're not even really in a professional environment yet, and like people are out here like networking at parties. Like, what is happening? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, dude. Like, one time I heard someone say like, "Add me on LinkedIn," you know, not Facebook, and I was like, "What the fuck?"
In a social setting, dude. I would make sure not to add that person on LinkedIn if that happened to me. I was like, dude, what are you talking?
Dude, I might fucking clown them on the spot.
No way, dude.
I've also heard like lots of different stories about like people who like sort of have the thought process like, oh, why spend the time and effort to be friends with them if they can't help me out or they're not of use, have value. And I'm just like, that's not like how you should see your friendships. That's like besides the point.
Right. It shouldn't be like the ulterior motive. It should be like you just forged such a good relationship with this person that it's like a natural progression of the relationship. That'd be like, oh, you know what? Like I want to help you. You know, like I don't care if I get anything in return. It shouldn't be like reciprocal. It's like genuinely, I care about you so much that I want to see you succeed. You know, and I feel like that is like super warped. You know, like why people are going out to, and I feel like that's like luckily a problem that I think became less of an issue as I went through this like years of college, you know, like freshman year, like the networking basically I remember like being like a meme, you know, like people would just like be memeing this idea of networking because it was like basically like from what I knew, like what McCombs was like drilling into their students, you know, where it's like, you know, you need to meet people, you need to make connections. And so it was like very weird. But I think like now like senior year, I don't even think it was that much of a factor, you know, like I don't know, like y'all can let me know if it was like different for you, but I don't remember really thinking about it as much. The networking component, you know, like as much of like as like a problem or like a inauthenticity thing when I was meeting people. But like I don't know what like y'all's experiences have been.
I mean, I think like I agree in the sense that like in freshman year, sophomore year, I thought it was a meme. I was like, dude, I thought only business school students need it. I was like, dude,
Right.
shit don't have any like effect on my life. And it's like when you do it in a like a genuine way and you don't consider it like networking,
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm meeting people, I'm making friends. I'm like,
right.
Things like more honestly.
Yeah.
Like you look back on it, you're like, oh, I guess I was networking, but like that's not the major point of it.
Right. It's networking because you have to put a word to it, but that's not what you were thinking about like when you were going through the process. You know, like you just have to like it's a term. You know, you need something to call it, so you call it networking afterwards.
For sure. I think I was very similar to both of y'all. Like honestly, maybe more to the apathetic side. I just literally didn't think of it. You know, I think in beginning of college, I was very much like I'm an introvert. You know, don't make me do these extrovert stuff.
Right.
And once I got to like, I think, you know, obviously as I grew as a person in college, I was like, you know, humans are social beings, you know, let's just cause like I'm shy and I'm awkward doesn't mean I have to give up on humanity. Right. And I think like I saw the importance of networking and even just like being, because you can't do everything by yourself. You know, I remember watching this, on Reddit that popped up recently, and then it was about Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's basically like, I'm not a self-made man because when I came to America, sure I had nothing, but like I had friends that, you know, invited me to their apartment for Thanksgiving. You know, they gave me pillows, they gave me stuff, and like they helped me out become established. Like basically, like you can't do everything by yourself. You need other people to like assist you in the process. And I think that's what I really viewed networking for, is more like not a place where I can use people to climb up the ladder, but just like it's a community, right? Like it's like a fellowship where like everyone is like they have each other's back. Because like you said, like I genuinely care about you and like I want to help you versus like if you help me, like what can you give me back in return?
Yeah,
like a transaction.
It's a transaction. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like
a really like another thing is like you aren't the master of everything. There's gonna be someone in your life that is better at X thing than you are. Like for example, even on this podcast, like we didn't make like the graphic, we didn't do like any of the music that we use in the intro and stuff like that. We had friends that we knew that just like wanted to help us out, and like that's just like the perfect example of it. It's not like you need to like, oh, I know this business contact that will do this for me.
Right.
Most of the time it's your friends.
Yeah. Exactly. And like the cool part is if you've really forged a relationship with someone, even if your friend can't do it, if that person cares enough about you, they'll find someone who can, you know, like there's this idea of that, like, you know, this network thing does not end at one degree of separation. You know, each person is another network, you know, and depending on how hard you forge that relationship with that person is how far into that network they might be willing to go for you, you know, but that's like dependent not on like how many people you've met, but like how deep of a relationship you formed with this person.
For sure. Like just being like shaking hands with people like, hey, by the way, like I went to Cornell, and they're like, oh, I went to UPenn. And then like there's a connection forged, like that's meaningless because it's just like if you define yourself by like your stats, then like you're honestly, to me, like you're not a very interesting person.
You're a Pokemon. Like realistically, you know, if you define yourself by your stats, you're a Pokemon. Like there's no there's two ways about it.
Like people have depth. Like as I really believe like you can't sum people up as an equation, right? Like they're not AI or robots, you know.
Right.
I think what makes people beautiful is that like they have these contradictions and these nuances, and like you got to respect that. So like you know, define yourself by like the institutions you went to or the job you have is like it's not gonna work on a personal level, and like you may as well just not try. And at least to network like that.
Yeah,
I guess that's why when we were freshmen, like the idea of these icebreakers and those types of fun facts you say about yourself seems so memey, is because it's not that genuine.
Yeah, and it's like you get into a habit of just saying the same thing to everyone, you know, and then you're really not like if there's no like personal aspect to it, you're not going to become friends with this person. Like if you're just repeating the same like 5 to 10 different things to them, they're not really understanding you any better than you've shown, you know, anyone else. And then I think that a big part about friendship is like this exclusivity, you know, it's that like I've gotten to know this person and therefore have an insight into them and they have an insight into me that other people may not have. You know, there's like this inner circle, outer circle idea.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like I feel like a lot of people, especially in college, like you want to be like, I want to be friends with everyone, which is not realistic.
Yeah, not at all.
And then like they have a really big pushback on the idea of like friendship is exclusive because like it sounds like it's cliquey. But in reality, like I feel like exclusivity is like what makes friendships beautiful because like you share a special relationship with this person that isn't shared by everyone else, right? Like think about like when you know that popular kid who's like seemingly friends with everyone, then like you're not really gonna care if they're nice to you or do something special with you
because that's
like,
the expectation.
That's the expectation, right? Like going out of their way to do something for you, which they probably can't even top if they're like that nice to everybody, is like what makes something special.
Right. Exactly. And I think that a lot of people very much like we were talking about fetishization, but like fetishize this like ultimate extrovert that is friends with everyone, is well liked across the board, and like the people just associate that like, oh, those will be the most successful people because that's what like that's the narrative that's sold to us, you know, that like, oh, you have to meet everybody has to like you, you know, maximize your chances of someone doing something for you, right? Whereas like it's like how much of that is like how lonely is that person who has like such shallow relationships with everyone, you know, and like you're never gonna come through for that person just like in passing been nice to you, you know, you're just not, you know, you may like help them with the door, like at most like, you know, like you might like be like, oh, like no worries, like lunch is on me today or something, you know, but you're not gonna like go out of your way to help that person, you know, you're gonna go out of the way to help that person who was like there for you when you were like, you know, like we like, people like to make the joke about like, you know, like the mom at the party, like, you know, whoever's throwing up, there's that one friend who like helps take care of them and stuff like that. But like that is like a very meaningful gesture, you know. It's like you are at your worst, and though there's this expectation of me to just like allow you to deal with it, like I want to sacrifice my time to make yours better, you know. And that's going to be the relationship that matters in the end. But like that's not what like social media would want us to think, you know, or like what like the system of like corporate America would want you to think that like, oh yeah, it's like, you know, the person who has just like formed one really good relationship is like likely. People want you to go to the Ivy League. They want you to be in like these secret societies that like ex-president has been in because the value of your network will be higher, right? But like, George Bush doesn't care about you just because you're in the same secret society he was at. Like, no one cares. Like,
that reminds me of that scene in The Social Network where like Mark Zuckerberg's like, I have to get into finals club, you know,
right?
Blah 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 blah.
And then, that's a real thing. Like these secret sites are real things that people really like sacrifice entire semesters of classes for. Like they feel the need to get into these. Like, and the more prestigious, it's like so weird. Like so weird.
Yeah, I remember. I like to call it clout chasing. You know, like they're so obsessed with. You know, it's like the guy in the Cowboys who died. In the organization on campus. Not saying like he was a clout chaser, but just like that. The reason why they put so much into hazing is like you need to put in a lot to even be able to be in the same atmosphere as someone like us. You know, like we're such a prestigious organization, and I think that's just really sad because like basically you define yourself by the labels you put in yourself versus like you yourself as a person.
Right. Yeah, it becomes like an accumulation of labels rather than like building this character that's unforgettable. You like want to build like this like social resume that's unforgettable.
So, something similar that like I talked about with someone before is the idea of like how this directly reflects itself on fashion. Nowadays, you see a lot of people wearing these brands like it's a billboard, like it's directly a label on their person, and it's like the amount of clout you have is based entirely on the brands that you wear and or use.
Right, and it's sad, and that's the other thing that's like sad because like I feel like fashion is one place where like commercialism like joins with the world of art, you know, in a very like obvious way, you know, like whereas like fashion is everywhere, you know, you're by going into public you're going to be exposed to these brands and stuff, right? It's like honestly like quite sad because the initial intention of most of the designers I like to think wasn't to be like, oh, we're going to make the most money. You know, it's like these people were like pushing the envelope of like what was possible and like creating art, which at one point someone decided to like commercialize, right, and use for gain. And therefore like other people like piggyback off of that, like, oh yeah, like I buy into that mindset, and so now this is no longer like an art I'm consuming, it's like a status symbol, right? And I feel like that is one place that I feel like one commercial aspect that's kind of like not ruined but like really like tainted that art for me, you know. It's like a lot harder for me to like see the artistic component that goes into a lot of these like brands, fashion brands, because it's like if I wear this, are people going to like enjoy the artistry of it, or just compliment it, or like participate in it because of like the person who made it, or the value behind that brand, you know? And it's like it kind of, it's done them a disservice, because now people are not wearing their shit because they want to, they're wearing it because someone will compliment them for it, you know? It's like kind of sad, like the art gets lost.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that like you're not able to discern like what makes something like what's good art or bad art anymore. It's more like who is saying this, right? If it's a respected reviewer, or like my friends like it, then like this is good art.
Yeah.
And I feel like it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about like this objective analysis, the scientific analysis, viewing of art, and that like, you know, I think to discern something, like you need to think, right? Like not to be pretentious, but like you need to actually like put in the effort to be like, oh, this is like what are these factors that appeal to me that I consider this good art, which could be different for everybody. But now it's just more like, I don't know, whatever fashion magazine is like, you know, Kanye's new Yeezys are the legit thing. Be like, oh, like, you know, like Yeezys are the best new shoe around. And then some other magazines like, no, Yeezys are trash. And I'm just like, oh, these normies, they don't know what they're talking about. When like nobody knows what they're talking about, because like they're too busy looking for like, you know, approval from like, you know, supposedly higher being.
Right, exactly. Like it's like if Kanye made it, then it must be good, right? Rather like the artist determines. And like I think that goes back to even like we're talking about Chance the Rapper. You know, it's like I don't think the artist should determine the art. You know, I think the art should speak for itself, and it's just a fact of the matter that the artist happened to have made it. You know, their life experiences have led that art to be created, but now it exists on its own. You know, and like I really don't think, specifically with like Yeezy stuff, like anybody would care about Yeezys as much as they do if Kanye hadn't made it. You know, like it's hard to really say that they would be doing as well as it is if Kanye hadn't put his name behind it. Like if it was just an Adidas shoe, I don't think it would be doing as good as all those other shoes.
For sure. I think another thing that I think is interesting is just like the experience of art. Like now that you kind of said it, but it was just like, it's not just the artist, but also the audience, right? Like the experience you have viewing the art. Like I know like some artists say this, but it's just like it means a lot to them if like their art, whether it's a story or a painting, you know, really spoke to a person, helping get through some tough times. Like if the artists themselves like should not be that important unless like they have I guess like if they produce a lot of good work and like, oh, you can probably trust that this guy might produce something good. It's not a guarantee. But what's really important is like, how do you interpret what they did, right? Because like, if like, I don't know, say like someone's poetry like really speaks out to someone, then like that's what's important, not like who wrote the poem.
Right. Exactly. And I honestly like, this is going to be a super controversial take, but like, I think that should be expanded. The idea of like the art speaking for itself, to like, I think like a lot of art suffers because of cancel culture. You know, I feel like we today are so quick to write off everything a person has done because of something else that they've done, you know, or like something that someone has created because of something else that they've done, you know. And I think that while that is important, because you don't want to be like benefiting people who have done bad things, but at the same time, you know, art is such that it does, people can experience art without knowing the person, right? And if that art has spoken to you, that cannot be taken away necessarily, but that feeling that you got initially cannot necessarily be always taken away by understanding who made it, you know. And I think that yes, people should be held accountable and like suffer for the bad things that they've done, but I don't think the art itself should be tainted because of that, you know. Like the art isn't bad, the person is bad, you know. And I think that when we're so quickly to like cancel a person, a lot of times what they have created also gets canceled in the process, and like that is us doing ourselves a disservice. You know, we are losing out on that potential like life gain. You know, there are people who like attribute their whole lives to like certain albums and songs, like, oh, I wouldn't be alive today if this album or song hadn't come out when it did, you know, it helped me through a tough time. They've never met the artist means nothing to them, but like that song could, you know. And like when they find out that gets kind of canceled, and then imagine like they're listening to it in public or something and like they get like berated for it, you know. It's like then it taints that feeling that they had, you know. of like this like at one point this was like helping me. It made me feel better. Like I bounced back from this thing, and now that I'm like getting essentially like dragged for it, you know, it's no longer that has that same positive impact. You know, like you've done that person a disservice.
Interesting point that my friend brought up to me recently is the exact same thing as this, but just like put the name to it. So Chris Brown, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think what he did to Rihanna was good. Like, in fact, it's like deplorable.
It's deplorable. Yeah.
It doesn't make the music like just trash all of a sudden.
Right. Right. Exactly. But like, I'm trying to think of like, but there for sure been like Chris Brown songs that like I remember listening to in like 4th or 5th grade, you know, and like it used to be like for me listening to rap in my house was like something I had to do in secret. Like if it happened out in public, it was literally like my dirty little secret. Like, I liked listening to rap, and I remember like Chris Brown, like a lot of Chris Brown songs that time. I forget, he had like a song with T-Pain. I'm trying to remember. Oh, Kiss Kiss. You know, like this song that he at that time, I think that was before the whole Rihanna thing happened. And even if the Rihanna thing had happened, I didn't know about it then. You know, so I was like, Kiss Kiss for me is like a very nostalgic song. It'll always remind me of like my elementary school days, right? But like if I put on Kiss Kiss like at a party or something, right? Like I have put on a Chris Brown song as a DJ, yeah, and people come to me and be like, dude, I think you need to turn this off. You know, and it's like yes, like I understand that Chris Brown like may also be leaving like a bitter taste in your mouth, but like I think that's more of a thing of like systematically separating person from their art. You know, because like it's like how many people do we read in our English classes that have done heinous things, but we just don't know, even if we don't like, even let's say yes, a lot of them we do know what they've done, but still continue to read them. But how many of them do we read that we just don't know what they did because it happened so long ago, where we didn't have like the media coverage to tell, that we just like continue to read their stuff, but just because we don't know they haven't done anything bad doesn't mean that they're like, it just doesn't matter, you know, like it just shouldn't matter whether we do know or we don't know, you know. Someone could have committed murder, we don't know about it, but we still read their stuff and like think it's like great, you know. And like that's because the art isn't the person.
I think like an interesting argument people use is like art is an expression of that self, which is true. But I think the dangerous thing is that like it's kind of like a halo effect where like you only believe good things can happen from good people.
Good people.
Like all the good people are good looking, smart, virtuous, and everybody likes them. And all the bad people are ugly, stupid, nobody likes them, and they're incompetent. But like, you know, obviously that's wrong because like the world is such a nuanced place, and you know, honestly, it's like one man's hero is another man's pariah, right? Like in this country, like I think an interesting argument I remember reading in history is just like we like don't like Hitler for understandable reasons. He's a terrible person. But if he won World War II, we would be talking about Winston Churchill in the same way we talk about Hitler, right?
Right.
But now we're like, Winston Churchill is a war hero. I mean, obviously some people now are like, yeah, he's racist and stuff like that. But like the thing is like, we will never put him on the same level as Hitler because the Allies won World War II.
Right. And they always say like the winners write history, right? The winners get to tell the stories, and like so much is lost in that, you know. And like I was also reading this article the other day about how in Germany they very much like embrace their history, like not embrace in the sense that like they're proud of it, but they teach the Holocaust in school and stuff, right? There's no like propaganda involved in how they teach that period of time. They like talk about it as in like, you know, this is a very dark part of our history, but they have memorials to remind them of their own evils, right? So it's like kind of the opposite of how like today like we refuse to remove like slave memorials. These are memorials to like remember that like the evil acts that like Germany has done, you know, like to remind like where they've come from. Whereas like in America, we love to like just kind of gloss over the period of slavery in history, you know, just as like a unhappy circumstance, right? There's no like regret. We're never taught regret, you know, we're never taught to be sorry about it. Whereas like in Germany, like they're taught to be apologetic about this thing that they have done. And they all take like this kind of collective responsibility for it. Like people who weren't even alive, you know, during World War II take this collective responsibility that like we don't have at all, you know. And I think it like goes back to that like same point of like what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think no, you go ahead.
Okay. I think part of the reason why we don't have this collective sort of American mindset is because there still is division within like the country. Like it's really big, so that's like part of it. But like there still is like a a southern versus northern sort of mentality difference. Like, for example, people in the South are like red states. They're conservative. They're like only believe in God and don't believe in science. And then versa for the North. Like there's people don't feel as linked. It's very, very sort of like you demonize the other side and then you just stick to your own side.
Right. And that's true, right? Like, so Germany definitely doesn't struggle with as much of like that divisiveness because it's still like one country, you know, and like, I would say like a lot of like the, like it's both the best and worst part about being in the United States, like how much diversity we have, you know, it's like we have diversity of people and a lot of diversity of thought. And like that diversity of thought is like what keeps us from like really like, you know, like solving a lot of foundational systematic problems.
Yeah, something like I was thinking about was like, we glorify like Nordic countries for like how efficient they are and how much they trust the government. They're also like 98% like that race, you know?
Right. And they all speak the same language, you know? They all have been exposed to the same, like all the family situations are relatively the same, you know, cultural values, like all that stuff is like the same, you know? So it's really easy to come to like an agreement when everyone's from that background. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and like, you know, kind of going off that, I was thinking about was like, most heterogeneous countries are like not super smooth. Like Canada is like better than the US, but it's not perfect either. Like they still have police brutality and like, you know, racism happening. You know, it's just not in like the cities where people are expected to be more woke. Like Australia is super racist. France is like pretty diverse as well. Like they have a lot of like Arabs, you know, traditional like white European who you would think is French. Like Africans as well, and they're also like very divided. I remember like when the World Cup happened, like there was a lot of talk about how like the team represented all of France, but like even for some players, if they did poorly, they would be saying, "You're not French, you're whatever minority you are," right? And I think like that's just something like as humans, like we have a very like tribalistic instinct, and our thing is like I want to identify with like the tribe I belong to, and you only is like on the good things you're like okay, like you can be one of us, right? But then when something bad happens, like you're a foreigner, you know? And I think like that's just something like I think, you know, all humans kind of have to like learn to accept. It's just like, you know, not everyone's the same as you, and that doesn't make them like a bad person.
Or a bad person, right? Exactly. And I think that a lot of that like has to do with like, you know, like seeing people more as like dynamic, you know, like not this like simple binary, right? How you were talking about earlier, where it's like good people will create good things and they're like they're good, always good looking, you know, like very sociable, like these like very like binary like good and bad aspects. Like I think like once we like start to understand the complexities, and I think that's like a natural product of globalization, you know, I think that's like a progression that will I'm very hopeful that we will eventually reach that point.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like, I mean, obviously globalization is having the past for like trade, but I think like the world is very different now, and like we're accepting these influences. And obviously, like we're gonna have to hammer out these rough patches. But like honestly, it's like if you want to move forward, like I feel like we have to be like optimistic and hopeful that these changes will be better, or else like, you know, we may as well just give up and just quit. But,
exactly.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely something like I was kind of like thinking about lately is just like, you know, kind of going back to like the whole idea of like the halo effect. It's just like I think people are just afraid to accept the grayness of people, you know? Like I feel like the fact that like I can enjoy something from this person who may not have been so great, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad person for
like bad,
yeah. I think like what's like hard is that like, you know, people may not be 100% like good or bad, but like I think it's just human nature to like have like these flaws that make you like honestly a shitty person. But like you're still capable of good, right? So I feel like, and honestly, it's like it's a hopeful belief in mankind to be like, okay, I know this person did some really bad things, and they produced this great piece of art. But honestly, I think that probably reflects the good in them. You know, like they were capable of like creating hope for other people, even when they caused pain for others. But like the message we should be saying to people is not like, hey, we have to eliminate all things that are bad. Because honestly, in real life, you can't just have everything you want in the world and like take away what you don't like, right? Like these things will always be intertwined. So I feel like I think it's more important to teach people like, or teach young people like, hey, like this thing is like has some good has some bad aspects, but I want you to think for yourself like what makes this good and what makes this bad versus like I
Right.
know this person's good, therefore it's acceptable for me to listen to them until they're
Right.
not. No.
Exactly. Exactly. We don't hear a lot of the bad things that a lot of people in our history books did. We just don't. We don't. I mean, I never learned about like all the like real fucked up shit the founding fathers did until like much after I finished U.S. history. And then I was like, dang, these people were kind of messed up, like for sure.
Yeah. But then like at the end of the day, like they still created this country and
Right.
like
We're only here
yeah,
because of them, Like
yeah,
we could have done whatever, but I have to be grateful for them to a certain extent. I wouldn't be
yeah.
here.
As much as it sucks, like it is what it is. But like kind of branching off of that, like do you view morality as something that's like universal throughout time? Or do you think it's something that is heavily influenced by the current climate, right? Because I know a lot of people, I remember reading just like good and evil doesn't change just because it's in a certain time period. That's why we should still like remove these statues. Because I remember some people are trying to argue like maybe we should remove the statues of the founding fathers, right? And I was like, I feel like at a time when like everybody um like was racist, and owned
Yeah.
slaves, like is it really fair to them? Like if they've never like if no one could even tell them that like, hey, this is wrong, like
Right.
what do you really expect from them?
Right. And I think that's also goes back to the same issue where people think these are monuments to those people rather than a monument to what they accomplished. Like Mount Rushmore isn't necessarily like dude, to be honest, like, I don't even know what presidents are on like Mount Rushmore. I don't remember. But like
Yeah.
I do know that Mount Rushmore is like like a symbol of the foundation of this country, Like d- like for sure those people have done some bad stuff, right? But it's like what they stood for. Like they're not going to be the founding fathers are not going to be remembered. Like let's say one of them was like really good at horse racing. No one will ever care about their horse racing ever, right? Like they're never going to be remembered for that. And any monument to that person will never be a monument to their horse racing. It's not even a monument to them, right? So I think that like it's like separating like this idea that like we have they've done things that are much more valuable than they're like much bigger than themselves, and like these monuments are not things to them, and they're not getting any, most importantly, are not gaining any benefit from these
Yeah.
monuments. They're
They're
dead.
dead.
They're dead. They don't get anything out of, they don't make any money from the monuments. They don't even like nothing we do right now can ever benefit them. It's just the memory of what they did, and the memory of them for me, for sure, the entire memory of the founding fathers is exclusively the United States of America.
Yeah.
And so like I think that that's why this like statue removal thing is like a sensitive topic, because it's like at the same time a lot of the people they're trying to get statues removed for were only remembered for slavery.
Yeah, for sure.
These
Yeah.
like people who are exclusively remembered for how much they participated in the slave trade, right? So that makes sense. Then if this person really has no like place in history other than to be like this icon of racism, then yeah, like remove the statue. That makes sense. You're actively offending people who are alive today.
For
But
sure.
like if it's like a founding fathers thing, it's like nobody remembers them. Nobody remembers them for their participation in the slave trade, their racism, and also even if they did remember them, they weren't alive during that time. So yeah, I don't think that morality can be universalized like that. Like yes, good and evil doesn't change, but how good and evil is perceived does.
For sure. And I feel like people are only like dealt with the card. People can only deal with the cards they're handed with. So it's like,
Exactly.
if someone was like, if you raised a kid in a certain environment to like believe that terrorism is good and stuff like that, like I would still say he is a victim of the system, because like
Right.
he was being told to do all this stuff that like he never had a chance to even know that it was wrong, and it's like
Right.
not fair to him either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you were conditioned for that. It's the fault of the people who conditioned you.
And I think this goes back to that negative feedback loop we were talking about earlier, because it's like they were conditioned by someone else and then them by someone else as well. So
Right.
who do you blame along the system? And it's like at some point you can't. Like
You can't. Exactly. Right. And you have to, at some point you have to hold the individual accountable, right? When it gets to that point, right? Like it is the person's fault, like for not like rising past the situation. But I think that's where things get really difficult, and that's like, that is like, it's I think it's a case by case scenario. There's no like way to talk about that in general.
Yeah, I think it's just iffy because like I understand a lot of people went through pain that like I have a lot of privilege that like I don't have to go through that, and like
Right.
it's like really like I do understand like I should not be taking away or silencing their voice, but at the same time it's like I guess like I want to sometimes I just feel like things are really polarized, and it becomes into like if you're not burning the witch, then you are a witch, you know, and then it's like I just feel like it's very scary, and that like sometimes like I'll admit like it's kind of I'm a slower person, like I need to like really process things in order for me to
Right.
come to like the same conclusion, right? And like
Right.
if I'm not instantly like on that viewpoint, then like I've screwed myself, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, and I think that like that like that more allowance, like more tolerance is like the only solution to that. You know, it's like it's people want immediate results always, you know, and I feel like especially now with like the Black Lives Matter movement, like so many people are afraid to speak up because they're scared, you know, they're gonna just get torn down. And it's like that is not gonna that way of treating things is really not gonna get that many more people to your side, you know. And
Mm.
I feel like that it's a lot of like a lot of the way we go about the conversation on like a case by case thing for sure, like how individuals talk about it. It's like more of a thing that needs to change like that. But I think tolerance is like for sure, like it's like cliche to say, but like yeah, like for sure we need to be much more tolerant of like the how people process things, you know. And like you also have to like people have to understand that like if you're not directly in the situation being affected, it is harder and it does take time to more like to create that empathy and to be able to place yourself there, you know. Like I don't know what it's like to be a Black person in America. I have no idea, you know. And like every day I am learning, you know. But whereas like there are people who are living that every day, so it's a lot easier for them to empathize with what's going on, you know. And I think that like tolerance is where it's like necessary, because it's not like because anyone's a bad person, you know. No one is. I mean, there are people who are bad people, obviously, right? Who are like very much against Black people, but there are a lot of people I feel like that just feel like disenfranchised by it because they don't know how to get into it the way other people have.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sucks that things take time, but like at the same time, it's like it took 4 years for people to like view Black Lives Matters as not like an attack on like the flag or whatever, but like
Right.
as like you know people are actually understanding like oh it just means like if someone's house is on fire, you should take care of the house that's on fire versus like a house that's not, right? But like
Right.
honestly, it took a long time for these like arguments or that explanation to come out. Like I really don't remember someone having that rational of an explanation like 4 years ago, right? But
Yeah.
like it honestly just like takes time for people to process and truly understand like all the nuances.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Wrapping things up because we're definitely over an hour now. But yeah. Basically, on a more lighthearted subject, what are your plans post quarantine?
It's just
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't know how to transition that. I'm sorry, guys.
No, you're good. Dude, basically, I have truly been missing like meeting people, you know. Like I like Alex, I haven't seen you in like so long, you know. And like my goal after is to like go out, get a group of people together, go dancing, you know, go like see things outside, like experience the outside, not fearing for my life. So when
Yeah,
those things
not feeling
finally get to
guilty.
happen, yeah, dude, not feel guilty. Exactly. You know, like even like taking a walk. I forgot my mask at home, dude, one time. Oh my gosh, the looks people give you. And I was like, dude, I'm with you. You know, I'm on your side. I also don't want to spread coronavirus, but I forgot my mask at home, you know? And so I think that that guiltless self-indulgence is what I'm looking forward to most post-quarantine.
Dude, I definitely feel you. A lot of times, like I'll like try to get like takeout or something, but I forget my mask, and I'm just like, fuck. I'm the people I criticize all the time.
Shit, I'm gonna starve today.
Yeah, dude, I'm a fucking hypocrite, dude. But yeah, I can't wait for gatherings over 50 as well. It'll be a good time. But yeah, wrapping things up. This was Nuanced Nonsense. We're not experts. We just like talking. Signing out.
Yeah.